All right. Thanks everybody for joining today. I'm looking forward to this session. I'm having two people on here are building some stuff that's actually very, very close to my heart, and I'm looking forward to having a good conversation about what they're building and how they're building it. This is a informal session that we do. We try to do this at least once a month, and talk to a customer, talk to somebody who's actually building some kind of scale out applications and doing things a little bit differently. So that we learn a lot in these conversations, but I hope you all learn in these conversations as well. So I'm excited about this. But before we get started, real quickly, this is kind of a beginner to intermediate type session. We just like to give everybody a little disclaimers, so people aren't like, I was expected to see code, and we're gonna have a conversation. We're gonna talk about a tech stack that that the Nightfall team actually chose and why they made certain decisions. The value and some of the areas of best practices that they've taken along the way. We have a couple of comments. We have a couple of topics we're going to cover, but we would love questions and comments from y'all. Please do use the chat or the QA if you're in YouTube. If you just enter the questions, they'll filter over to us as the panelists here, and we'll answer them in real time, hopefully. So. And then before anybody asks, yes, the recording will definitely be available a little bit later today. We kind of make these things available as soon as possible since we're streaming to a bunch of different platforms or whatnot. So, but by introduction, hi, my name is Jim. I am the principal product evangelist here at Cockroach Labs. I've been with Cockroach really for quite some time now, and I've had a lot of different customer conversations along the way, and I'm looking forward to joining Dan and Evan today and having a conversation. So Dan and Evan, do you want to join? And just let's see your faces. All right. So there we go. See, Dan is actually a real person. He's not just a cartoon. It's a real him and Evan as well. So, and Evan, you look a little bit different without the glasses. I'm gonna have to tell you that. So,
sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. So Dan and Evan, do you just want to just introduce yourselves and what your background is and what do you do at Nightfall? It'd be great. And we'll just start there and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good. My name is Dan. I'm the manager of the platform team here at Nightfall. The platform team works on our file extraction layer, as well as running the detection engine in production. So the data science team, they do the research. We do the operationalizing that kind of work into making it kind of happen in the real world. We also maintain our developer API product as well. Yeah. I've been with Nightfall almost 3 years, starting out as a software engineer and then kind of moving more into the managerial side.
Then Evan, you want to go and introduce yourself as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Evan. I'm a backend engineer at Nightfall. I've been with the company for a little over 2 years. I work on the platform team pretty closely with Dan on a bunch of the things he mentioned. So that file extraction layer, our customer facing API, and then also moonlighting a little bit, I suppose, in our in some of our DevOps layers. So Kubernetes, Terraform, all that kind of stuff.
So definitely the cloud native path, Evan, and I think we all kind of moonlight and 15 other things half the time. So. Evan, what language do you guys code in over there?
We're probably 90% Go. We have a handful of things in Python, but mostly Go.
Cool. Yeah, it's interesting. I was at KubeCon last week, and I was having a lot of conversations with a lot of platform engineers. So, Dan, a lot of people kind of like yourself, managing teams that are kind of bringing these things into production. I had really interesting conversations about like using threaded languages and what does that mean on top of cloud native technologies and stuff. And I think it's just the right. It's the match is correct. You know what I mean? So, have you always been coding in Go, Evan, or is it kind of a newer language for you?
Not always, I guess. It was just when I joined Nightfall that I first used it in production. I had used it years and years back in college, actually, for like one semester, and it changed quite a bit since then even. So this was my first experience. I was previously using Java and Node.js in a former role. So
yeah.
First time.
Well, I try to encourage as many people as possible to go out and learn Go or Rust or one of these kind of modern languages because I think it's cool stuff. So, all right, guys. So let's just start this conversation. Dan, I'll start with you. not everybody knows what Nightfall is. I loved your introduction to it the other day when we spoke. So you just describe what Nightfall is and what y'all doing.
Yeah, definitely. So Nightfall is a cloud native DLP platform. So what we try and do is we try and highlight the data that you would find either important or sensitive in places where it should not be. For example, we produce like a Slack application that you can install into Slack, and we can try and find things like social security numbers, credit card numbers, people's names, and we can alert you of if those are found in any of those channels. We find that a lot of the customers, they're in regulated industries, or they're just concerned about the proliferation of personal information that in places where it's not supposed to be by policy, or to keep that customer hygiene. And so really we have a data agnostic backend that we can pipe in whatever data, and we can try and just use that to discover what is inside.
Yeah, and are you guys looking? So data loss prevention is something near and dear to my heart. I'm sorry, guys, I'll age myself a little. 20 years ago, I was working at a data loss prevention company. Very different than what our problems are today. I think data is everywhere, and the different kind of endpoints where data could be exposed is pretty intense. But it's still a basic problem. So how do you guys look for data? What is are you guys just taking exact data, looking for social security numbers and, certain things like that? Are you just or is it less, and a bit more fuzzy, and you're applying AI to kind of find things? What's the special nature of what y'all doing?
Yeah, I love that question. I think, there's two parts really to the engineering org. So there's a part that really does those integrations. It's not just Slack, there's Google, there's GitHub, there's Atlassian suite products. And then there's kind of the platform team and the data science team, where we just try to build an agnostic platform. We could ingest any data, and then, as you say, we're going to use kind of AI techniques like machine learning to try and figure out, if there are social security numbers in there. That's a really good example because they're pretty well formatted, right? There's 9 digits in a social security number. However, there are some digits the IRS just does not use. You can't have triple zeros at the beginning of a social. So you can add some heuristics and some rules around that. However, a lot of the kind of important information is in the context, right? What the human is saying around that social security number, because 9 digits appear in lots of other places, like telephone numbers, for example. So how do you disambiguate between what those 9 digits mean?
Right. Yeah. So I presume there's a lot of NLP and just a lot of a healthy dose of machine learning going on within the company. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a difficult problem, honestly. Back in the day, we called it exact data matching. We were able to look for exact patterns, or, using, regular expressions and all these other things. But getting to this looser kind of definition of what data is, can you guys find things like intellectual property going out of the organization too? It was always a challenge, I think.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, we're kind of starting to move towards that, where it's not just really well-defined personally identified information. It's you could provide us a file, and we're just going to search for that file, right? So if you have an important PDF that's a patent or a patent pending, you could find that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, the purpose is to basically protect the organization, right? I mean, that's ultimately what Nightfall is doing. It's basically a risk avoidance, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you don't want to avoid that proliferation of data from a more secure area to a less secure area. So it's probably acceptable to keep the credit card numbers in a credit card number database, or encrypted in somewhere secure, but it's not acceptable to share them over Slack, even with performing a business critical operation. So.
Yeah. So how much? And one last question, just around the business. You guys, I'm sorry, I'm just curious, because this is an old world for me a little bit. It's a little bit of a return. How much data loss at this point is some bad player versus inadvertent? You know what I mean? Can you guys characterize that? I mean, we always used to think about that a lot, and I think people would be surprised, right?
I would say it's 99. It's some number of 9s. It's just inadvertent. Someone is just trying to do the job to the best of their ability, and it's just unfortunate that the quickest way is just not the most secure way, right? And so we just provide that kind of extra nudge just to be this is against policy, or we need to think about the consequences of that action.
Yeah. Yeah, like the malicious thing is like 1 in a million, honestly. Like the malicious player, it's so funny. I remember one day we were off in a customer, we hooked up, you know, our product to this thing. We were like, look, we have network tap, and we were just checking it out. And the guy that was in charge of, like, the CFO had sent a spreadsheet to somebody, and it had the social security numbers of like the 15 executives of the company. And he's like, I didn't send that. And he's like, we're like, yeah, you did. We'll show you. You know what I mean? It was like, it was in a hidden tab of a worksheet of a, you know, like in an old Excel spreadsheet. And like, I don't think people want to harm the company, but like you should protect, you want to protect the company too at the same time. I presume that kind of stuff is still happening all the time, right? So
yeah, exactly. It's mostly inadvertent.
Yeah, so that's cool. So there's a lot going on at Nightfall. How big is the Nightfall team at this point? Like, is it how many people are about at the company, and how large is your engineering org?
Yeah, so we're about 50 people, and we're about half of us are in what we'll call engineering, product design, data science. Yeah,
and it's a fairly complex stack, right? Like you guys are doing lots of different things. Can you just kind of characterize, like, just it's such a general question, your tech stack in general?
Yeah, of course. So we run pretty much exclusively on AWS, and we use EKS to run all of our applications on Kubernetes. All of our business logic is written in Go, and that obviously has to be containerized. And you would not be surprised to hear that we store a lot of data in CockroachDB. I don't know, Evan, if you want to add anything to that.
I think those are all the key bases. I mean, we use lots of the other core components as well in AWS, right? Like things like SQS queues when needed, things like Lambdas for various workflows. But yeah, mostly it.
And is it just one EKS cluster, or are you guys running across multiple? And how do you deal with, like, multiple regions, or are you just kind of running in one region at this point?
We're currently running in one region, so and one EKS cluster as well. But this is definitely an area that we're starting to gear up, thinking about, okay, how can we support multi-region in the future? And that actually also happens to be part of the appeal of Cockroach as well, right? Because of the very strong first-class support for multi-region.
Yeah, it's, I was at KubeCon last week again, and I was having these conversations about this stuff, and it's like, why federate the clusters? Maybe federate just at the data layer might make sense, right? Run the same compute all over the place. So Evan, do you work on the Kubernetes clusters, or you're an engineer, right? Like what part of this whole game are you working in?
All over the place, I guess, right? Definitely
utility player, I guess.
There you go.
Like whatever you need.
Yeah, I would say I'm mostly kind of in like the service layer, like application code, all of that kind of stuff. But definitely, all throughout the stack, right? As we add new components that maybe require new, like, Kubernetes resources or new hardware or new databases, right? I've spent a lot of time, with the team kind of building up these Terraform modules and kind of maturing our ecosystem there.
Right. And did you guys start kind of cloud native in Kubernetes and this whole world from the very beginning, or was this kind of an afterthought?
We were definitely cloud native, is my understanding, from the get-go. Kubernetes, we migrated to, that wasn't our original deployment. That was, when I joined the company a little over 2 years ago, we were kind of just running on Docker containers. EC2 is pretty old world, I guess. I don't know how fast we moved these days.
I would envy anyone who starts a company with Kubernetes. Like, I think it's like pretty high overhead for us, even with our like relatively large engineering org, and it really supports those needs. But when it was, a few people in a room, I don't know whether that overhead is worth it.
Yeah. So yeah, we moved to Kubernetes maybe a year and a half ago.
I mean, it's hard to find the people that actually manage the damn thing, right? So, it's like, you're going to hire somebody just to do that. And it's I think things are starting to get a little bit more simple. I don't know if you guys ever played around with Google Cloud Run. Have you guys ever seen this thing? So
no.
Yeah, containerize an app, dump it on Cloud Run, and it has this like serverless kind of up and down compute. Any containerized application, like I kind of imagine a world where like Knative becomes mature and Kubernetes becomes a little bit serverless and a little bit more simple too. It'd be great. So yeah. So in that context, so you guys are using Terraform to deploy infrastructure, CI/CD. Like what else are you guys using kind of in the whole kind of software delivery supply chain stuff?
Yeah, so kind of unsurprisingly, we use our own product as well. So we are pretty heavy users of Circle CI and the Nightfall plugin for Circle. So we can scan our own code for things that we think are sensitive. So that's, again, PII or even code, sequence and code. So if someone accidentally commits the API key, it will fail the build. So yeah, we use Circle for CI testing, and then building the Docker containers themselves. They get obviously pushed to the registry, and then it'll commit into Terraform, and then the Terraform will be pushed, will be applied automatically.
Yeah. So how does it work then? How does the application architecture work then, Dan? Like, because you guys have customers and you guys are running this as a service for customers. I mean, are you running within the environments of each of your customers to like look at the endpoints and all the various different things? And then I guess, is there a different layer where it's all kind of the data that you guys are running? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Something that we kind of have also experimented with internally, but we found really that it's a lot of operational overhead just to run the data detection system in particular. So, we have got relatively good at a lot of expertise at how to run these specific models, and running them on just like a box in someone else's data center was really difficult for us because we have kind of heavily optimized for a specific setup. And so what happens is, we say integrate with Google Drive, and we will pull in that data into our cloud, and then, securely scan it and then give the results to whichever admin has requested them, rather than like running in someone else's VPC.
Yeah. So are you guys pulling in from, say, let's just like Google Cloud, let's just say Drive. Are you pulling data over, then scanning it? Or are you guys scanning it in place and then pulling back things that are of possible issue?
Yeah. So we've had to pull it over just to keep those, keep our operations more simple.
Yeah, I get it. Well, that makes sense. So I mean, what you're dealing with is really a problem of scale. It's a huge, massive problem of scale, right? I mean, how large is that backend kind of analysis kind of engine that you guys are running? I guess let me put it in a way, like how much data is that you guys are actually looking through?
Yeah, it's terabytes a month that we scale.
Yeah, I would presume. And is that terabyte? Can it be terabytes per user or terabytes per customer? Or is it just like, because it can get pretty big, right?
Yeah. So it could be any of those things. One of the really difficult challenges that we deal with day to day is just the customers. They can upload anything into any of the systems that we scan for them, and so it can really fluctuate. Like one day could be a really, really high traffic day if multiple customers are doing a lot of work, or one day could be a really low traffic day, just depending on I assume on Monday there's going to be basically nothing happening. So. Yeah,
and is there any contention in the system? Like, did you guys have to architect in like the volume of data coming in? Like if everybody's like full blast, like how do you guys mitigate that? I mean, that also is a problem of transaction. I'm sorry, I'll get to the database in a second, but I'm super curious in terms of how y'all do this, because that's a really difficult challenge, right?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there's three approaches that we take that are kind of combined. One is that we look for really systems that horizontally scale really well, and so we built a system that has very few dependencies, especially when we get to the scanning layer on like a data layer like Cockroach, because like we understand that there's also a limitation even in say Cockroach for how much we can scale horizontally and then pulling connections to a DB. And so we have right at the back of the stack where the scanning happens, we can scale very freely. The second, I think, is our approach to like streaming data systems. So we use a lot of Kafka and a lot of Kafka queues to kind of like, if we get a peak, we can like level up that peak. And so like, we give ourselves our own time to scale, for example. And third, I think even more than the Kafka queues, we also use a system that's called Temporal that is workflow management. And that also is another layer on top that again allows us to kind of more predictably do asynchronous operations. And so that we make sure that all of these jobs get completed on time.
Yeah, dude, Dan, I'm sorry, but I'm loving what Temporal is doing. And it's great to meet somebody who's actually using it, because it's, I think that's, what a great platform. How have you guys been using Temporal for a long time, or is it relatively new? You have, you're old users.
We started on Cadence, around the time that I was with the company. And then when they started Temporal and spun that out, we migrated over, and that's been also a very positive experience for us to work in. Like many of our services use it, and it drastically simplifies, our code, our retry error, whatever handling.
Yeah. If anybody's not familiar with what Temporal does, just go check it out. I mean, there's basically, what is it? It's like workers and services. I forget how it works, you guys, but basically it just makes sure that like your service, it allows the developers to kind of define what they want to actually run and to what level kind of, and it just basically maintains that all that's on, right? It's really, I mean, the developers are using it, right, guys?
I would say it's like, if anyone is familiar with like Salary, Rescue, or Sidekick, it's kind of like a next generation of that, where there's just way more tools available, rather than just kind of very harshly graded asynchronous jobs. You can do asynchronous jobs that can then schedule each other or signal each other, or then retry only certain parts of the job instead of the entire job. These sorts of more configurability is like, it's just what makes it really cool.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I'm sorry, I didn't want to go down the temporal rat nest either, but I'm intrigued by it, honestly. I think it's really cool. So, but let's get to Cockroach. So what are you guys using for? What are you using, Evan? I think you're kind of the one who's kind of deep into the Cockroach world, right? I'm sorry, it sounds weird, but what are you guys using for? What are you using Cockroach for today?
Yeah, so we are using Cockroach across a bunch of our different services. There's several use cases, but there's kind of two big ones that I can talk about in terms of, I guess, load and our usage patterns. So one is as like an API gateway, like metadata storage type layer. So we have spoken a little bit about our customer facing API already today. And when we launched that originally, we launched it on AWS's API gateway product. And after some amount of time, we kind of came to the conclusion that it didn't do exactly what we wanted it to. It didn't have quite the level of configuration and control we wanted. So we just said, all right, I guess we're going to write it ourselves. And so, we're using Cockroach to store all of the kind of key entities there, right? So API keys, usage tiers, rate limits, request logs, telemetry, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, as you might expect from kind of like an API serving layer, it needs to be pretty performant on both of the reads and the writes. We've seen 100 requests a second coming in, for example, and that'll give you we'll need to write the request logs for all those hundreds of requests coming in, and we also need to be able to read out quickly so that we can say, is this API key valid? Is this customer within their quota for this particular request that they're trying to make? So that is, a very high bandwidth use case that Cockroach has proven to be really scalable and useful for. And then the other use case that we've kind of more recently been working on is an interactive analytics dashboard for Nightfall. So as Dan mentioned before, we integrate with lots of different products: Google Drive, GitHub, Atlassian Suite, Slack. And if you're a customer of all of these different products, some of these alerts or violations, as we call them, kind of end up spreading out to lots of different destinations, right? Like maybe people get emailed about things that went wrong, maybe they get a Slack ping, whatever else. So we wanted to create, kind of a centralized place to host all of this information and allow people to view these violations and interact with them, and just all of the typical slicing and dicing you might get out of a analytics dashboard. But it's not quite traditionally just an analytics read-only view case where you might want like a columnar database or really heavily optimized for only analytics, because we also want that interactivity piece. We also want users to be able to see a particular violation or a set of violations and say,
that's right,
hey, I would like to take action X on that. Maybe that means deleting, the offending file, or maybe that means, alerting somebody that, some violation happened. So Cockroach, again, has kind of given us this really nice balance between the reads and writes required for this use case.
Yeah, and so ultimately, I think the second use case, it's basically a system of record for what's happening, what y'all are finding, right? I mean, basically, right? And then are you guys, I know it's kind of talk about it as analytics, but it's really kind of like what's happening in the system, right? Are you guys running separate analytics anywhere else, or is it just basically you're just pulling right from Cockroach?
Right now, we're pulling just straight out of Cockroach.
Yeah.
And we're mirroring that data into Snowflake as well for some other analytics stuff. But Cockroach is able to support kind of the current analytics and the current use case for you.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Go on. Sorry.
Big users of the change feed feature. So we have the cockroaches. They write to S3, and then we have like a glue script that just shoves them into Snowflake, and that just allows us to run our like BI dashboards and stuff like that.
So you're using CDC and change feeds directly into S3. Yeah, and that as a native feature within Cockroach, fairly easy to configure, fairly easy to understand. Yeah. I mean, it's not a separate piece. It's not a separate tool. It's all part of the database, as it should be. I laugh about that. It's interesting, guys. Like, your use case is very similar to what, like, we have a customer, Starburst. If anybody doesn't know what Starburst is as well, another great like data tool, like distributed analytics. Same kind of thing, where it's like an API gateway. So they need to log into a bunch of backend systems and pull data so they can actually run analytics. As a cloud service, well, they need to track exactly what's going on within all those analytics. It's very, very similar to the stuff that they're doing as well. For them, the next problem they saw was about scale and how do you go beyond. I know we touched a little bit on this before, Evan, but I think we're single region today. Are you guys looking at this from a multi-region point of view, and kind of what do you see the challenges of that going to be?
Yeah, we definitely are looking at multi-region. That was for sure one of the big, I guess, selling points for us as well with Cockroach is seeing how easy it would be to scale to multi-region someday, because we're in security, right? So it's pretty sensitive, it's pretty regulated, and what couples well with that, right, is the ability to unlock things like GDPR, right? The whole EU region is so kind of locked down in various things with data locality. So as we start to think about how can we unlock that EU region, Cockroach, we're hoping is something that will really allow us to play into that.
So totally loaded question here, but how does Cockroach help you kind of meet those kind of data privacy things? Like the requirements of a GDPR. Like, look, Cockroach can't solve GDPR, dude. It's like crazy, but it can help, right? So what are you looking at it to do?
I think the main thing would be if we can. Cockroach has really nice primitives for spinning up a cluster, but then allowing that to extend into multi-regions, so that when we have particular customers that are based out of the EU who would like to, say, use our API, we can guarantee, right, that data can live in the EU region and not cross into the US.
And we don't even need to deal with that in the application layer, right? We can completely deal with it in the data layer, and like the applications can be ignorant of that fact.
Now, Dan, you're starting to sound like me. That was my loaded question, guys, because like, seriously, like, why deal with that at the application layer? You're relying on developers to implement some sort of best practice, and what happens when things change, and like to me, it just makes sense to do those sort of things in the data layer. Geo-partitioning data and tying things to a particular location, it's going to get more and more important over time. It's interesting that you all thought about scale kind of was this a concept from the very beginning? Or were you guys using another kind of database or another kind of data tool to do all these things, and you said, oh gosh, we're going to have that problem? I don't know if you guys were at the very, very beginning, the very decisions, but there's a little bit of a history there, right? Did you guys architect from scale from the get-go?
Maybe not from scale from the get-go, but what I can definitely say is that at least when I joined the company and through my first several months here, we really had kind of like a sprawling set of databases under our purview. Generally, it sounds like when the company was started, we went with a lot of technologies that the founders had used previously and that people were comfortable with. And at things like the service layer and application layer, like it's all pretty like de facto industry standard tools, and those we continue to use today. But with databases for various use cases and various projects, if somebody said, hey, let's use Cassandra here. Hey, let's use Rapset here. Hey, let's use Postgres here. And so we had all of these different databases, and it really kind of became a headache, honestly, in terms of which database do we want to use for this one? And like, oh, well, if I need a service to read from this database here and then go into that service over there. So that became very much a pain point for us. And so I think Cockroach has kind of become a solution that we have started to unify on because of, the ability to scale multi-region, the ability to scale, nodes horizontally and have a managed service through something like Cockroach Cloud. And then also, because it provides a really nice, kind of SQL interface, and transactions and acidity are very important for us as, as a security company. We have a lot of, as I've spoken about earlier in the talk, high read, high write bandwidth operations. Yep. So Cockroach gives a great, SQL-like interface there. And so it adapts very well to like a Postgres-like environment.
Yeah, well, I mean, it basically looks like Postgres. And, the funny thing is, I think it's typically when people are building, Evan, like they just go choose whatever they're familiar with. You just totally told that story. Like that's what people do. It's like, well, I used this last time. And it's like, but databases are kind of funny. There's different databases are going to give you different value. And I think the more developers actually understand that, the more important it is, because it's not just what you're familiar with that's important. There's probably somebody's got to prop the thing up and deal with it. And there's like, how am I going to deal with X, Y, and Z issues and these sort of things? But using a distributed database isn't always straightforward either, right? Like what was the learning curve for you as you started to use Cockroach, Evan? I mean, was there, or were you just kind of familiar with it was natural? I mean, most people I talk to are like, oh, it's a little bit of a shift in paradigm, right? There's some different things you have to think about, right?
Yeah, definitely. So as far as that learning curve, right, getting started, is easy. That part's not tricky because it does prevent that Postgres-like interface, which is great. For the first use case I talked about with the API, it was easy, right? Spin up some tables and use some transactions here and there, and it's high read and write bandwidth. Great, problem solved. But then as we talked about, this analytics dashboard use case that we progressed into more recently, there were some bigger challenges here with, kind of schema design and query performance and some of these other issues. As you mentioned, right, this is a distributed database. So as particular rows farm out to individual nodes, maybe in the cluster, if we need to perform really complex queries that, in the case of this dashboard, for example, involve lots of joins, you can definitely end up with hotspots and with definitely subpar performance. So this was something that proved a bit challenging for us in terms of design, but it was really great. We were able to sync with some of the architects at Cockroach and get some support there about how we can kind of better leverage the Cockroach architecture and use alternate like primary key choices and index choices and things like that to better improve the performance and meet our SLAs.
Yeah, so this primary key question is always one of those. I'm sorry, Dan, did you want to jump in there? Or I'm sorry, I was just talking.
Say that we also had a pretty similar experience with the API gateway that we were building, but kind of the other way, right? As Evan mentioned, like, we can get bursts from the customers of like hundreds of requests per second. And the fact that, we kind of reached out, we asked, like, any suggestions here from the Cockroach team, and they were just like, oh, relax the ACID requirements. And it's just awesome that you can just be like, oh, as of system time. And then it's just like, it's like an extra however many characters. And then, that unlocked a huge amount of performance in our cluster.
Yeah, we'll relax system time for reads, but like for transactions, we're going to peg on serializable isolation. So you're going to be guaranteed, correct. And, I contend, like, how many developers actually know what isolation levels are anyway?
Right.
Very few, and I just figured, like, why not just peg out? And so that if they're going to make the choice, then just let's make the choice for them ultimately. And so, like, great, we're going to have guaranteed transactions, but relaxing the read and doing follower reads, that's what you're kind of talking about. It's a feature that we have. Being able to do that, I think, is a critical thing to understand, right? So
yeah,
go on. Sorry, go on.
All I was going to say was that was a huge win.
Yeah. I see, this is kind of one of those concepts too, Evan, that's new when you're kind of dealing with this. Like, oh, what's a follower in a database? I don't know. Like, but a distributed database, it's one of those things you have to get to understand. I want to go back to primary keys for a second. Mm-hmm. And your experience, Evan, kind of going through that process, because you guys had systems and databases in place. How difficult was it for you to kind of figure out, like, wait, we've got to think about primary keys differently in this database? Because actually, y'all, if anybody's listening, they haven't used Cockroach, understanding like what primary keys mean to Cockroach is actually a pretty big deal. How hard was it for you to kind of go through that process, Evan?
Yeah. Luckily not too difficult when I was able to speak with, kind of the support folks.
Yeah.
The choice of primary key, as I understand it, ends up being that when you're talking about a distributed database, the earlier columns, I guess, in the primary key can decide where data is sharded out to, right, in particular nodes, which means that if you choose, if you have a particular query pattern that doesn't play well with that primary key sharding, then you're going to end up having worse performance because you're going to have hotspots on particular nodes. You might have to reach out to more nodes to fetch data across a join. So you want to make sure that the two are kind of in sync well. Like the example I can give for our use case was that we had, this is a violations dashboard, right, as we called it. And so for a dashboard, the main sort criteria or the main usage is going to be based on time, right? This is time series-ish data, right? So our original primary key was kind of just based on customer ID, but we also had a separate index available for the timestamps of these events as they occurred. But based on the way we were writing the query and based on the way that Cockroach, the query optimizer, was running, it wasn't really best utilizing that index. And so by folding the timestamp into the primary key, we were able to achieve much better query performance.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. It's basically anybody here is listening. If you're going to deal with a database that does any sort of like automated sharding, you have to think about that key because that's ultimately kind of what's used. We like hash indexes, like like using UUIDs wherever you possibly can. Because that's really what's going to place data in different things. And a hot range is kind of one of these things that once you start dealing with these things, you start understanding, what a hot range is once you've actually dealt with one. But until you have, it's like, well, do you want all your queries going to one shard? You don't really want that to happen. You want it spread across the entire database. And primary key is really one of those things that I think is really critical to that. So y'all, like it seemed like a fairly easy choice for y'all to come to Cockroach. Did you guys evaluate Cockroach versus any other things, or was it more like you had pain, found this thing, and you're like, hey, maybe we could do this? Like, what was your process?
I think Dan, you were a little more involved.
Dan.
Voice.
Yeah. I think we did kind of run a process. We ran, as Evan said, we kind of had a menagerie of databases, right? So we tried to, we had experience with all of those. I think, we knew that we felt very comfortable with Postgres already. And so, that was a big selling point for Cockroach, is that we could almost just like transition straight over and like use that knowledge just to kind of ease our way on the ramp. But we were looking at other distributed databases, and compared to that, I think, I was speaking to someone the other day and they were like, you need a PhD, right, to run Cassandra successfully in production. And so I think it ended up being a pretty easy choice.
Yeah, I will say, you guys, and I've said this 1,000 times, Cassandra is amazing. You kind of need a PhD in Cassandra to make it do the amazing things, but it's pretty amazing. And also I think the pandemic would have sucked without Cassandra, because like all these streaming services, they use so much Cassandra. Like, thank God we have it, because we would have been really bored the last 2 years, I think, you guys. So it's crazy, right? So that's really cool, you guys. Thank you. You guys have an amazing stack. I think it's like a really interesting place because you're using kind of, it's not even like, it's not bleeding edge or cutting edge. I mean, these are kind of like emerging technologies, right? Like, is it kind of across the whole board? Is that kind of the way you look at things? Is it, because these things are risky too. Like, you just choose whatever is new, or is it like, are you guys doing full evaluations across the entire stack?
I would say we choose whatever's new. I do think, we do try and do an evaluation, pick the right tool for the right job.
Right.
But we're definitely not scared to try something that is new, right? I think the fact that we had so many databases just meant that we were trying to find the right one for our use case. And I think we eventually did find the right one for our use case, Cockroach. And so that freedom just allowed us to kind of go on our journey that way while building product, rather than kind of letting the product stay in stasis while we tested out a bunch of them. We were able to build product and then also learn about what data store features we needed. that also expands to the rest of the stack. We didn't move to Kubernetes until we had like a real need and we saw why we needed Kubernetes, and then it makes sense to me. Same with Temporal, right? We had like a pretty simple workflow engine before that, and then our workflows became like way too complicated, and like we needed, as Evan said, we needed to do all this retry handling manually or whatever it might be, and so we moved to Temporal. It's just trying to find that right crossing over point, and then the right tool, and then making sure that tool is willing to accept some level of risk, but also be at least somewhat mature.
Yeah, Dan, what is that right? This is a really difficult question. What is that right crossing over point? Like, what is the level of pain, right? Like, is it just,
Yeah. For us, I think it's a really good question. It's probably when, maybe when you spend more time fighting the fire than building the next thing. If we have a database or a workflow or whatever it is that we are spending the majority of the time just maintaining and keeping that thing up, then I think you really, really need to reassess what is happening. So hopefully just before that point.
Yeah, it's like the technical debt has gotten so bad that there's no new technical debt because there's no new tech.
Uh,
well, I mean, hopefully before that point, if
exactly,
you can see it coming in the distance.
Yeah. And I honestly, I think the level of automation we have around systems and the things that we do today is just tremendous. There is a lot of new stuff out there. I think there's an emerging set of tech that does actually help people get, massive efficiencies. I work at Cockroach because I think it does it for the database. I think your stack is a good investigation of some of those areas where it makes sense. But don't do it until you have like the right problem and you have the right people to deal with it, right? So I presume you guys are always looking for new people as well to join the team.
Always.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on behalf of us at Cockroach, thank you for using Cockroach Database, y'all. On behalf of the entire company, you guys have been a great customer. I'm so happy that it's a partnership and us helping you get successful, and we're learning from you. And it's a great experience for us. But for anybody who's kind of looking to do something interesting with a really cool tech stack, honestly, like y'all seem to have the right approach. And I will like also say, DLP is actually a really difficult problem to solve. Like there's a whole DLP conversation we could have had about how you do data matching and everything else, but I don't know enough about data science anymore to have anything really deep anymore, Dan. But I ask my top level questions. So,
I mean, if you guys want to try it out as well, just go to Nightfall.ai/developer, sign up for free, send us some data, and then see what you can find inside.
I think I'm going to try it. I'm going to send it to all my old Vontu people and see if they can trick you guys or whatever. So, well, cool. Well, thank you guys for doing this. Seriously, we're very thankful for y'all to be customers, and I really thank you for taking the time to do this as well. And I thank everybody for listening and hanging out with us today. There's a lot of people on YouTube, a lot of people on this channel as well. So, any parting words, guys? What is today? Wednesday? Middle of the week.
Thank you for having us. I think we love using the database. We love that it's open source, and we love the support that we receive from you guys. So.
Yeah. Well, if anybody's actually looking for support, go join our Slack channel. Final thing is, y'all, we're giving away here. I'm going to do one last screen share, y'all. I'm not going to do a full thing, but if anybody does want to go download a copy of the definitive guide to CockroachDB. We just published our first O'Reilly book. It was, I think, 2 weeks ago. I think it would have been really weird if O'Reilly would have given us like an elephant or a llama, right? Like, I'm pretty happy they did choose a cockroach for our book. I don't know, be kind of strange. But if anybody's looking for that, go check it out. So, but Dan, Evan, thank you so much for doing this today, guys.